So from a government perspective, we're kind of very keen to adopt AI opportunities, but we have to be very conscientious of how and where that happens. It's great to see so many firms being quite ambitious in understanding how and where that AI can make maybe some of their bureaucratic tasks and processes simpler, particularly in lower risk clients. They still need some checking in the background to make sure that what's being delivered is appropriate. But for us, there are a few more pitfalls, not least in terms of investigations and being compromised if there are biases in the AI tools that you are using. We've seen colleagues in policing fall foul of that, where there's kind of a disproportionate focus on people from ethnic minorities. So much like the fintech and the financial institutions, we're kind of taking it slowly, looking at where we can introduce AI in kind of lower risk processes or where we can automate tasks more effectively. But I guess AI as we understand it now is relatively new. There are lots of different facets that fall under the umbrella, but we've been using big data analytics for the best part of a decade. So we're already well versed in that. I think it's how we transition to kind of some of the more nuanced tools and some of the more kind of large language models and how we might use those effectively in terms of passing information, particularly that we receive from international partners. So slowly but surely, I guess, is how I would describe it. So I don't know if it's directly related to the RegTech space per se, but there's been a piece of work done by colleagues in the National Economic Crime Centre called Data Fusion, which is partnerships with, I think, 7 UK banks, where there is kind of a more dynamic sharing of data aligned to specific risk parameters. So, for example, what does organised immigration crime look like? What are some of the risk indicators that banks can usefully use to trawl through their data and then provide that information to the NEC in real time rather than through a suspicious activity report? And they have quite serious ambitions to take that forward. And I think, that will have to involve RegTech, that will have to involve data providers, that will have to involve data analytics companies. So, I think we're going to transition away from private sector, meaning just banks, to actually what does the ecosystem look like and how do we use it effectively? So I guess the thing that comes before it is the publication of the UK's next national risk assessment, which should be due sometime in the summer. And then that will obviously provide a framework for what does the future of regulation in the UK look like. Do we see some sectors dropping off because they're low risk and there is genuinely no risk that needs to be mitigated? Does that see the introduction of entirely new sectors that have had no exposure to regulatory requirements? How do they build their capacity? And maybe this is where RegTech firms come in and add some real value. How closely are we going to align with the EU? They're introducing new requirements, I think, on football clubs or football agents, which is a whole completely unregulated space. So, for me, I think national risk assessment, supervisory reform, and then what does the landscape look like after that? Because inevitably there will be new firms brought into that have no experience, no exposure to risk, and they're going to have to get up to speed pretty quickly. So from my perspective, I guess, it's an opportunity to hear from companies and from individuals that I perhaps wouldn't necessarily hear from. You've got a dedicated forum for RegTech firms to really share their insights, share their expertise, share their particular service offering, and that doesn't always happen in other financial crime compliance conferences. Sometimes the agenda is dominated with very specific conversations with kind of, I suppose, traditional finance providers. So this has been really eye-opening for me. I've had some really good conversations with people so far, notwithstanding the fact that some people get worried when they hear I'm from HMRC and they start telling me they're tax compliant almost immediately, as well they should. But I think it's just an opportunity to kind of get like-minded people in one space and have a really quite adult and mature conversation about how we can partner effectively.